Hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here. I should warn everybody that this is being live streamed. This is something we need to tell people before beginning. I am Stefanos Levidis. I'm from Forensic Architecture.
My name is Johannes Bayer and I'm from Sea-Watch.
I guess before starting discussing the event that we will discuss today, it's worth saying a few things about what our organizations do. Maybe we should start with Sea-Watch. Or rather, I should start with Forensic Architecture and then discuss the event. So Forensic Architecture is an independent research agency based in Goldsmiths University in London. So we're an academic, multidisciplinary team of architects, scholars, filmmakers, artists, archaeologists, and more. And we use means of spatial design and media analysis to produce evidence of human rights violations and of ecocide. The evidence we produce is usually used by prosecution teams in trials. We also publish our work in a variety of forums, in exhibition spaces, in truth commissions, in people's tribunals, and of course in the media. We often work in cases where human testimony is either erased or silenced or doctored. And we try to engage with different testimonial forms, sometimes ranging beyond the human speech, well into the built environment and the natural environment. I usually start by describing how we understand the term forensic in forensic architecture. This is something we get asked a lot. How does architecture fit with forensic science? Forensics is typically associated with the state. It's the art of the police and of the official institutions who always maintain an optical advantage towards an event. So they seal off a crime scene and they restrict access to the site. And indeed, here we can see the murder scene of Pávlos Fýssas, a young Greek rapper, anti-fascist rapper who was killed by Golden Dawn in Greece. And this is a case we have worked on. So evidence is gathered and analyzed in the absence of civil society. And it is this monopoly of the state over the collection and processing of evidence that allows for information to be weaponized within public discourse, which, as we will discuss today, is the case in European borders and in the central Mediterranean. So for us, it's in this contemporary condition of misinformation and post-truth that one can begin to understand the importance of what we call counter-forensics. Counter-forensics is an attempt to work around this disadvantageous access to evidence in order exactly to cross-check, to unsettle the obscure truths that state institutions often produce. So we try to deconstruct false statements made by state officials and recreate part of the truth behind an event. I should mention that forensis comes from the Latin word forum. Forum is a space of public dialogue, a space of politics. So for us to make evidence public is to make evidence political. To a certain degree, our investigative approach came as an evolution in practices of state violence. So contemporary warfare, in particular, is increasingly an urban phenomenon. And it is within such a context that the built environment can no longer be understood as passive. It's not just a site where conflict plays out. On the contrary, it's quite often the very instrument of state violence. Increasingly, buildings are the target. People die inside their own houses, in their neighborhoods, and the tissues of buildings record the violence that unfolds around them. At the same time, urban environments are densely technologicized. So acts of violence are often recorded and distributed in social media, in mainstream media. This is an example from a case we worked on in the Gaza Strip, in Rafah, where we investigated Israeli air raids in August 2014. But today we will focus on events that occur in border zones, quite far from inhabited areas, and quite far from their respective systems of capture. And we will discuss an investigation we did with Sea-Watch. Perhaps I should mention that we have a subdivision within forensic architecture called forensic oceanography, which investigates cases that take place in the open sea. Now, the sea is a very different material and temporal condition to work around methodologically. It's a space that is open. It's lacking clear points of reference. It is a body that is in constant motion. And precisely because it's largely inaccessible both by civilians and by authorities, it's commonly understood as a space of lawlessness. As we understand it, and I'm sure Johannes will be able to tell us more about that, the Mediterranean border is not a space of lawlessness. It's a space that is constructed precisely through an excess of law. So you have different government bodies, different coastguards, supra-state agencies like Frontex and NATO patrol vessels policing these areas, so they are not empty. They are in fact a hybrid terrain that is made and enforced in the intersection of law, infrastructure, and nature. And I say infrastructure because even though there are no fences in the sea, nobody would choose to cross the sea if there were no fences in the land to push them there. Maybe if you want to say a couple of things about Sea-Watch, and we can move to discuss the event.
Okay, I try to give a very short explanation what we're doing. So 2014, after the big accident in Lampedusa, I think 3 days ago there was the Memory Day of this accident, and also the cancelling of the Mare Nostrum operation, which was an Italian Coast Guard and search and rescue operation, which operated in front of Libya to prevent loss at sea. This was a little bit like the impulse or like the starting point where the idea came up to say, okay, we from a civil society, we want to go there and have kind of like a neutral look at it. That's also where our name is coming from, Sea-Watch, because the idea in the beginning was to give journalists, like free journalists or embedded journalists or from different media kinds like video or radio or photography, the possibility to be in this very remote place in the world, because actually you can only be there and document things when you have your own big ship. That was the first idea, to be there and show the Europe or the society what happens there and why people are fleeing and what situations they are getting in there. In our first operations, we saw very quickly that it's very difficult to play only a passive part in this area, because in the moment you are there and you find a boat in distress, you have somehow to help these people. And this is when Sea-Watch become more and more also a search and rescue NGO. Still, we put a big focus on trying to give all people around the world like knowledge and also like the informations what's happening there, and also free journalists to attend missions of us, to make photos, make videos, present their story, because without these stories and these photos and videos, it's very difficult to understand this very surreal moments you have to witness there, and it's very difficult to transport that into civil society. We found out that for effective or especially safe search and rescue, we need a bigger ship. So we bought the Sea-Watch 2, and then we bought 2017, we bought the Sea-Watch 3, which is still operating, even if it's now seized by the Italian government and is blocked in port. We're still operating the ship. Also, like in the presentation, which will come after my speak, it will be also the Sea-Watch 3, which is visible there as the ship. And we're also operating an airplane, it's called Moonbird, to get a better view from the top and also to find ships in distress fast. In the November accident of 2017, which is also like part of the investigation from forensic architecture, it shows also very like in a dramatic way, how important it is to find these ships in time, because if they're losing air or there's some damage on the boat, it's like a matter of minutes, maybe an hour, until people will fall in the water and die. So this is why we 2016, 2017, we started operating a small airplane to find ships in distress very quickly. And I will stop here. Maybe there are questions we can have later about Sea-Watch or about the case, but I think we go now into the case of November 2017.
Right. So we at Forensic Architecture, we collaborated with Sea-Watch to investigate this event that took place in November 2017 in international waters off the coast of Libya. Here we have the Libyan Coast Guard using a vessel that it had been gifted by the Italian government, preventing Sea-Watch from assisting migrants in the water. Indeed, here you can see the then Italian Minister of Interior Affairs, Marco Minniti, ceremoniously handing over the vessel to the Libyan authorities. The vessel was called the Ras Jadir. The Coast Guard was quick to blame the Sea-Watch crew, claiming they had arrived first at the scene where a dinghy carrying migrants had deflated. People were in need of rescue. So the Libyans claimed they had the situation under control until Sea-Watch showed up and created chaos. So they tried to deflect responsibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, since you were there, and I have only looked at the event from our office in London. So the event occurred in a political context very similar to what we are seeing today, where European authorities are criminalizing rescue. They accuse rescue crews of cooperating with smugglers, they confiscate their vessels, and they equip and train coast guards on the other side of the sea to do the dirty work of border patrol. And this is a condition we at Forensic Architecture call mare clausum, in contradiction to Mare Nostrum, which you mentioned earlier. And I should mention there are some harsh images coming up. When investigating human rights violations at sea, we always analyze and map all available digital traces of an event, whatever we can find. In this case, we have distress signals, AIS data, that is satellite vessel tracking data, weather and current data, and this all helps us locate the event and the various actors involved in space, and also within particular maritime jurisdiction zones, SAR zones, territorial waters, etc. This particular event unfolds in international waters a few miles north of the coast of Libya. Rescue NGOs, of course, understand very well the importance of recording their actions, and we were discussing that earlier, precisely so that they can defend themselves within this hostile climate. The same, of course, cannot be said of coast guards, who prefer to operate in obscurity. They rarely release footage, and when they are forced to, or where they decide to release footage, it's usually edited and made so that it constructs a narrative that they want to construct. And this is, of course, true in the central Mediterranean, as it is in Greece and elsewhere in the European borders and worldwide. So the Sea-Watch vessel here was equipped with 7 steady cameras and 2 GoPros that were mounted on the ribs, the rigid hull inflatable boats that assist people in the water. We worked with Sea-Watch to synchronize these pieces of footage and to link them with the audio recording of the Sea-Watch bridge, so we could have as clear an account of the event as possible, both through video but also through audio. These are the different cameras that were mounted on Sea-Watch. And indeed, we were able to retrieve a short clip filmed through a phone of one of the crew members of the Libyan Coast Guard. That's the one in the middle. So we use this footage to digitally recreate or create our own version of what the Coast Guard usually calls situational awareness. Situational awareness is an understanding of where different agents are or what is happening in a scene. Call it situational counter-awareness, if you will. we use 3D models as dynamic digital environments that help us locate cameras and other media artifacts in space. We call these 3D environments operative models, and here we are paraphrasing a term coined by Harun Farooqi, where he talked of operative images as entities that not only represent, but also do things in the world. They serve as an essential means to construct evidence and assemble a forum around this evidence. So navigating between different points of view, we try to reconstruct the rescue operation and represent it in 3 dimensions, switching from camera to camera, but also across time. So this is the view from the central mast of Sea-Watch. The first thing we did, again in collaboration with Sea-Watch, was to identify the vessels that were in the area. And in this case, in the immediate vicinity of the boat in distress, you have a French Navy frigate that observed from a distance, a Portuguese Frontex helicopter, and of course a Libyan coastguard vessel. We tried to approximate the respective distance from the refugees' dinghy, and we did that precisely to demonstrate that the Libyan coastguard were not the first to arrive on the scene, as they claim, but multiple vessels arrived together. So we tried to unpack the claims that the Libyan Coast Guard made in order to interrogate and contest the policies they materialize on the field. They claimed that they had the situation under control until the Sea-Watch dinghies arrived and caused people to jump into the sea. Based on the testimony of the crew, but also from the survivors, we looked from people that were already in the sea. And indeed, we find that people were already in the water and in immediate need of rescue when Sea-Watch arrived at the scene. So the Coast Guards did not have the situation under control. You can see people in the middle of the sea in need of assistance. This is a camera, a GoPro camera mounted on the helmet of one of the rescuers. I don't know how much you can see from back there, but these are people in the water. So we followed the cameras that record the rescuers' attempt to help people at the sea, while the Libyan Coast Guard crew are standing in their vessel looking. They haven't, in fact, even lowered their dinghy, right, to rescue people from the sea. And this is a pattern that we see not only with the Libyan Coast Guard, but also in Greece, Turkey, in most maritime borders. You have coast guards that are insufficiently trained, operating in vessels that are in fact designed for patrol and not for rescue. So when a person is suffering from hypothermia or is exhausted, they cannot do many things when you throw them a line. And you can see the difference in how the Libyans operate and how Sea-Watch operates. Closer to the water, pulling people out. At this point, as people try to escape the Libyan vessel, swimming towards the Sea-Watch dinghies, we can see the first person drown, and that hand does not appear again. A few seconds later, the Coast Guard crew start throwing several objects towards the Sea-Watch ribs, causing them to retreat. So they throw this that object, and they also even throw potatoes. So the rib eventually retreats, but at that moment a man jumps into the sea. It was the man you could see in a circle before. Hoping to reach the dinghy. The dinghy doesn't see him because they are afraid of their own safety. They're trying to leave the scene, and in a matter of seconds he drowns. Literally in a few seconds. So that's a second death that can be attributed to the inability of the Libyan Coast Guard to perform rescue. Again, you see that man jumping. Nobody assists him and he perishes in the sea. I'm not going to play this clip. I don't think we need to see it. During the same time, we can see the Libyan coastguard crew use a rope to prevent the rescued migrants from jumping in the front part of the boat. They cordon them off and they use it to beat them with it. Some people still manage to escape, and eventually, as the Libyans understand they are losing control, they start their engines and take off, carrying a person that is hanging from their ladder. The vessel continued towards Libya, and I will play the clip in a second, violating the international principle of non-refoulement, which forbids any authority to return a person to a country where he or she will be persecuted on account of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, etc. And of course, we all know what the conditions in Libya are. And that is not to say, of course, that in Europe these people would have been entirely safe. And this is, I think, worth noting, that Europe has in many ways failed migrants trying to reach safety here. But of course, it's a different story in Libya. This investigation renders visible precisely this informal and obscure strategy of refoulement by proxy, where countries on the other side of the Mediterranean perform the unpopular task of policing and containing migration. This way, Europe's border is extended to the countries of departure and to transit points beyond Europe into Libya and into Turkey. So what we see here is effectively what migration scholars call the externalization of the European border regime. To investigate such complex events occurring at sea, we need a practice that inverts the gaze, a practice that is plural and is mobilized within existing social struggles, a practice that is born out of relation between people who experience violence and activists who take their side, like Sea-Watch, diffuse networks of open source investigators, scientists, etc. And the presentation of evidence must also be socialized with lawyers, journalists, and sometimes, as is the case here, in cultural forums with cultural institutions. I think this case is an example of the brutality of the European border regime. Sea-Watch is an example that stands up to this regime, and I think they must be defended, and I like to believe we tried our best with this investigation. We will open it up for dialogue. I might play this last clip. We take questions.
I think I have something to add, which is maybe interesting. It's I think a year ago, so there was this New York Times interview with me and with Steffi from this November incident, and I was trying to explain that this is not an accident in terms of this. It's like a tragedy happened. I would always say it's the best documented one, because as I said, we're operating Moonbird, and this is something which is. And this is not extragated, this is happening 3 times a week, that a ship is sinking and vanishing completely, or people get rescued too late, so half of the crew of a dinghy in distress is lost at sea. And also after this incident, I think after this picture we saw on the last slide, now when they're starting, They vanished, and then we started to search for survivors together with the French naval vessel. And what we see there was that there was literally nothing left from the boat or from the people, which means that after an incident like this, and there's no ship like the Sea-Watch with all the cameras and the GoPros documenting the cases, after in half an hour, I would say maybe an hour, on the sea you will see no remainings, because the people doesn't wear life jackets, so they will sink, and also the boat they're using, when it deflated, the engine will just drag it down, or the heavy metal and wood which is inside the bottom. And this, I think, is important to add after something like that, because it looks like there's this one accident and now we documenting because it's such a tragedy. But it's not, it's just the best documented one. So this may be interesting to add.
Right, I think what's also interesting to consider is that these deaths at sea are usually attributed to the sea, right? The sea is cast as the perpetrator. And the role of the authorities that weaponize the sea is often obscured. And in recording your actions like you do, you try to bring these relationships to light. Like I mentioned, we understand the sea and in fact border natures, border ecologies as a hybrid result of, yes, nature, but also of legislation, of infrastructure and of military power. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. We have, I guess, another 15 minutes or so left. Happy to take questions and discuss both this event and also the work of forensic architecture and of Sea-Watch.
Who are you aiming to give this video footage to in order to prove your case? Like, which officials? How can you win your argument? Like, who's the one you're passing it on to?
So maybe you can say from.
Maybe you can discuss this particular case, and maybe I can say a few things about how we.
I mean, I can just say maybe the side from Sea-Watch. There are, I would say, two very important sides on this kind of reproduction. And even if it's very sad, the most important one is the narrative, because these ships are bought and brought as, like, from the European Union. Like, these are not ships like from Libya, these are ships which were given to Libya to operate exactly in these areas. And so I think the first biggest win with like a very detailed analysis to, in the end, have a dominant narrative which is supporting the case that things happening there are not okay and they are at the European border, because in the end we are voting for the people who selling these ships or giving these ships to the Libyans and supporting them in their operation, and this is Europe in the end. So this is the first one big thing. The second thing is way more complicated, and this is the legal side of the action. And I don't know, maybe you want to add something there on the legal side, or like, oh. So the legal side is like, I mean, there's different breaches to law, but still it's like international waters. Libya is one of the 3 countries who didn't sign the Geneva Convention. I think with North Korea, the third one, I don't know. So what's the legal framework there? They actually can bring people back to Libya. That's the sad thing about that. The problem is, how do we put that into a legal body or framework inside Europe? So it's very difficult to get, like, let's say, the commander of one of these ships in front of a European or German or whatever court. But still, if, for example, later on the people who are now on the deck of the, like in the last slide, on the deck of the Libyan coastguard vessel, when they maybe have in the future the chance to be in front of a European court, and this is evidence, historical evidence, which will at least show that they were brought back illegally from open sea.
I believe Greece is the other country that hasn't signed not the Geneva Convention, but Article 3 about returns. So we normally, as I mentioned at the beginning, we juggle between different fora. So we don't always believe the court is the best way to go about it. So we always consult with our partners, of course. We have seen in the past and after this event, in fact, rescue NGOs being criminalized and prosecuted by the Italian authorities. So it could be the case that this is presented before the Italian state investigator. We didn't get there, luckily. But also we quite often turn to cultural forums, to exhibition spaces, to the media, to truth commissions, different ways of disseminating information. The key to our methodology, to our mandate, is that there must be a civilian counterpart to a state investigation. We must also produce information around an event. It must not only be the state that releases information. And I think that resonates with Sea-Watch and with the name Sea-Watch, because the state always, it functions through seeing more than its citizens. And by being there, being in the sea and witnessing and recording these things, we can, I guess we can construct a more democratic understanding of what is happening in these borders.
And I think also that the things are very highly political, and so it's so important that these informations get out and the narrative is there, and it's kind of proven facts, because otherwise it's our word against another word, or and the military or Frontex, they will say nothing to it, they will not comment it, so it's word against word, and then it gets also in the media, it's blurring out. So it's so important to have like hard facts or like very good analyzed facts to give it a little bit of power and to show what is really happening on sea. Are there any more questions?
I'm curious, how do you finance your action? In fact, I don't know where your funds coming from.
I mean, it's different between the two organizations, but we receive a European research grant from the EU. We are an academic team, so our funding comes with the mandate to further academic research. So this is how we also choose our projects. Of course, we weigh their political urgency, but also every project pushes us to develop new research tools. So most of our funding comes from there, and then for particular projects we get separate funding, which is different in each case. But we believe it's very important to be transparent about our funding also, because we would never receive funding that would ask us to do something. The funding we receive is research funding, and it's basically take this money and do research, and then we have full authorship over what we do.
And for Sea-Watch, it's more or less the same. We want to be completely independent, so our funding is 100% private donations. So actually, like guys who want to support us, giving us between €5 a month or 20 or 100, and this is how we're collecting our funds. So there's no state or big thing who's giving us money. I think the biggest donations like something like €50,000 single donation. So this in the area we're working. And as by German tax law, we need to be 100% transparent in our donations and where we're spending the things. And there it's quite easy to see that it's 100% private donations. And also what may be interesting is, what differs to other NGOs, we have a lot of people who are donating us. Like it's very a lot, and they are donating small amounts. So we have a lot of people donating, I don't know, like €100 a year or €50 a year, or like just €10 or something like that. So our biggest challenge, I would say, was always, it's actually, it's really sad actually that, I mean, like to operate a ship and a plane and forming this NGO from zero, this is like just operative and like technical, like a very big challenge, but, or rescue people, like finding these people, like getting standard operation procedures who are so safe that we can like save at once like 300, 400, 500 people, but that's actually in the moment not our biggest challenge, because our biggest challenge is a pure political one. Our ship is still blocked in port. We have to pay thousands of euros every month for lawyers and procedures to get the ship out and to stay operative. And it has actually nothing to do anymore with that our challenge is to technically like keep the ship operating, like finding crew and stuff like that. It's basically like political. So that's what we're fighting like every day, to keep the ship operating and saving people. And yeah, that's I would say our biggest challenge. And I think this will also be for the next years our biggest challenge, because Sea-Watch also believes that we don't consider ourselves as a pure search and rescue organization. We are we're doing politics, and we are having political statements because we think that we are not the solution. Like even if we have like 3 or 4 or 5 ships, we could not save these people. So we are for like a safe passage, and it's a political claim, and that people have the right to travel safety and are not forced on these kinds of ships. So these are our challenges.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Super interesting presentation. Thank you very much. Like, both amazing work. In terms of like the specifics of what is going on in Italy, if you have seen a change since Salvini has lost his post as Minister of Interior, there is a new Minister of Interior. She's obscure. She has no social media. She gives very little information of what she does. But it seems like it was a positive thing. And also, another question, if you engage with the Italian public, because I feel like it really responds a lot to the perception. The public perception plays a key role. The migrant issue has been so powerful in the media that, I'll make an example. Yesterday, 2 policemen were killed in Trieste from someone from Dominican Republic. The perception was, oh, it's the fault of the boats. We know that Dominican Republic does not come by boat to Italy. Like, this is the level of indoctrination that people respond in things that are not even logical anymore. So yeah, that's the 2 questions.
Okay. Like, of course, Salvini, in his way, was of course very aggressive in the way he tried to frame his political game around NGOs. Like this closing the ports and all these decrees he put in place. And after the change, I think things getting a little bit better. Like the Ocean Viking, operated by Doctors Without Borders, they were allowed last week to enter again with the cooperation of the MRCC in Rome, like the Coordination Center for Rescue Cases, to enter again a Sicilian port. And this didn't happen for over a year. So I think there is an operative change. Still, the new government is highly afraid of a negative framing of their actions. So I think that they're very careful in how to act and react to us or the other NGOs, because they have now the time until the new government is elected. And if you look at the how we call it, like the votes, if the next vote would be next weekend, then it looks very bad for the new government, or the government which is now in place. So of course they have to find a way to show the Italian society that it's possible to find a solution for this problem. And in these terms, we can really understand Italy also, because like just geographically, it is the place where we have, or like people are going to, like Spain and Italy. So I think that the only solution, and also to back the new government in Italy, is to find a very quick and suitable European solution for distribution, because otherwise in 1 year or 1.5 years Salvini will elected, and then probably as president, and then we have to see how it's going from there. So I really hope that there will be a positive narrative And I think this positive narrative is only possible if there's a European solution to that.
I have another question. Apart from your boat and the Libyan one, we saw a French frigate and a Portuguese plane. Do you have any interactions with them, and what can we learn from them, if you have some?
Yeah, so my role on the ship is I'm the head of mission, so I'm operating and coordinating the SAR event like this. So I was on the bridge together with the captain. We were in contact with a French frigate. They didn't want to get closer to the incident. They sent a small rib to mainly collect dead bodies. There was this helicopter and there was a plane and also like an Italian warship, which was far more away because I think the helicopter has to come from somewhere, or maybe it comes from Lampedusa, but I think it comes also from an Italian ship. Interaction. I mean, it changed. Like when we started operating 2015, 2016, there was a close collaboration and rescue cooperation between the mission Sophia, the Italian Coast Guard, and the NGOs. And this changed more and more and more. And under Salvini, like, I mean, they canceled the Sophia operation, or not directly canceled, but like retrieved all the ships from the Mediterranean, from the European military operation. And I think the French one was embedded in the NATO mission. So why did they did that? Because they also the NATO and Sophia, like the European Euronav mission, were afraid because they would run into situations where they had like 200, 300 people on board and were not allowed to bring them to Sicily or to Italy or to a close port. So the American ship was like, I think, like blocked on the water like for 12 days or 11 days, I don't remember, with people on board because Salvini didn't allow them to bring people on shore. So it was not only against us, it was against all operating ships like merchant vessels, military vessels operating this area. And I think maybe also in November 2017, it was not so dramatic like then in 2018 and 2019. But we talked with the French frigate and they told us that we should engage in the rescue and they will stay standby. And I think, but this is just me personally, it's not Sea-Watch, this is just my interpretation of the radio communication and of the whole political thing is that French is supporting another a government actually in Libya, then these ships are coming from, which is strange, but it's like this. So I think they want, for military reasons and for like, it's a little bit sensitive maybe for them to engage in something like that, where they even maybe are forced if they visually see like this kind of break of law, then they could also be taken accountable. So I think that was the reason why they stayed away and just sent like a small inflatable boat to collect in the end like dead bodies. That was a little bit the engagement. You can also ask like general questions. That doesn't have to be directly in the direction of this November case, or maybe also.
Since we're in Brussels, how much of what we discussed are you pushing on the institutions? Like, for instance, I work for Oxfam. We have a big migration advocacy campaign, but I've never seen such material. Like today, I was really impressed by the quality of the material you have. It's real evidence that is often not seen in DG Home, and I know it's very specific, but like that's the European, relevant bodies for this.
On our end, we publish the work in any means possible. In this case, we did a collaboration piece with the New York Times. So we didn't directly talk to official bodies, but through the press, I believe this arrives to the people it should arrive. Yeah, we also submit our evidence to courts. We don't directly talk with governments, and in fact, in most cases, it is governments that we are investigating. We engage, we research state violence. In the past, we have presented before the commission here, we have presented at the UN a few times, not this particular case.
I mean, 2 days ago there was the hearing with Carola Rackete, and we also had before a meeting with the Commissioner of the European Parliament. And we try to bring also like evidence into the direction, but then we have to see where to play it, because then we leave the area of like, let's say, legal work to political work, which is then, okay, who is in interest of what behavior? I think that it is, and this is a sad thing, it is well known, the behavior of the Libyan Coast Guard, for example, is well known in Europe Parliament and also in the Commission, because the papers, and they're openly, you can openly download them on the internet from the EU pages, of the reports of Libyan Coast Guard officers are connected to people smuggling and illegal activities in Libya. This is all well known and it's documented, and you can even, like all of you can download it if you dig to documents from the European pages. So this is like more than the advocacy side of our work, and there we try, of course, to engage in things like, for example, there's the one big topic is criminalization of rescuers or criminalization of solidarity, and there's this how to say, Facilitation Act, I think it's called, and it means that by facilitating the movement of people, you can make yourself like do something illegal. I think the only country who's not saying that is, I think, like I think it's Germany, it's Ireland, and it's Portugal. It's the only 3 countries where it's legal. All the other countries in Europe, if you, for example, drive someone over a border, it's violating the law. And only in these 3 countries I just said, it's like you have to get, like someone has to pay you. Like, here, 200 euros, please bring me over the border because I don't have papers, then it's illegal. If you just bring someone over the border, it's not illegal. But this is only for these 3 countries, and all the other countries, even France and all these countries, it's illegal to act in solidarity, even if you, I don't know, like have some people over, like this French guy who had like migrants in his house and gave them food. He has to go in front of a court, and these are things we're trying to tackle. Also, one thing is like this is like in Germany. But what we're trying to tackle is that the distribution is going on a smaller local quantity, like that, for example, a city, or in Germany, like a federal state, can decide if they're taking refugees in, because in Germany it has to go over the Minister of Interior, and I think in a lot of countries in Europe is like that. So it's not the municipal also cannot completely overrule like the other political bodies and just say, okay, we can, like, maybe we are a small city and we have place for 25 people, we would like to get them in. And this is things we're trying to tackle on the European level.
I have a question about your academic research. So do you sometimes face critics by politicians who say that you're not working neutral because you're working on politically, I don't know how to put it, but very interesting cases who receive a lot of publicity?
Yeah, we almost always face that kind of criticism. Rarely do we get criticism in form of arguments. And in fact, we want that, we welcome that, and this is why we make our work public, both on our website, also we exhibit it as a form of peer review. Normally, when governments respond to our work, it is at the level of, yes, they try to attack our funders, they try to attack our intentions, and they try to attack the fact that we are flexible with the spaces where we present our work. So in a parliamentary hearing in Germany, we were called a bunch of artists. And that was used as an argument to not take our work seriously. But we believe that when human rights violations occur in front of a camera and are increasingly imaged. Artists, aesthetic practitioners, when they occur in space, architects are well versed to undertake that kind of research. So yeah, we do receive a lot of criticism, but not enough criticism on specific arguments, which we would welcome.
I have just a question. Thank you for the presentation, it was really interesting. But my question is not really linked to what you described, but it's a bit to understand if you know, because I know there's a lot of NGOs working at the level of the boats and also refugee camps, but I would like to know, or what is the European Union really doing when it comes to the distribution of the migrants across different areas and different regions, because I mean they often go to Italy, Greece, France, and then you see huge problems in integration, but there are other countries that are really eager to take them and to integrate them better, and I think this has really political influences and consequences. Just to know if you're aware of any of that.
I mean, there was the Malta summit a couple of days ago where they tried to find some new approaches for distribution. But as we're looking at laws now, it's more or less a Dublin III, which is looking at how people get distributed. And Dublin says quite specific that people have to be registered in the country where they step with their foot on land, which makes for countries very difficult like Italy and Greece or Spain now to handle these things. And then they need there's no real rule for this distribution. So after that, it is always bilateral talks between countries or deals, or for example, Greek or Italy, they get money from the European Union for hosting migrants. But on the other hand, the European countries are not so willing to have bilateral talks and taking people, and it is because it's a big gamble in the end, because every country is afraid if they're saying now yes, then they have to take everyone, and that's always like kind of like political suicide, sadly. But in the most European countries, it is political suicide. So they're very trying to find a solution where more countries are willing to take people. So they're talking now a lot about this kind of like the willing countries, because they try to get like on a EU level like a solution, but the problem there is that there are countries who are completely against it and blocking like every try to change something there. So the next step will be like that there will be countries who just say, okay, we're going to do that, there will be a distribution, but how, and if humanitarian aspects are recognized and stuff like that, I don't know. I don't know.
One question, and I think we will have to break for the next panel.
Hi, it's actually a very quick one, but I was wondering how much time and people do you need to put an analysis like this together? And how big is your team, more or less?
This was quite quick, exactly because it had been documented so well on the side of Sea-Watch. So we had a very hard package to work with. It took, say, 4 months, 2-3 people. Some investigations can take upwards of a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. We can have a team of 7 to 8 people, but this is kind of the size we're talking about. We normally work 3 or 4 cases within the office. There's 15 to 20 people at any given moment. Yeah, so this is one of our challenges. To go back to an earlier question, we have to filter really strictly what cases we take on and what cases we leave out, because we can't do everything.
Yeah, I think our time is over. If there are additional questions, then you can just come to us like when we're leaving. One more question, we have time? Okay. If there's another question, we have time for...
Sorry. So now we have a socialist government for a time now that at the narrative level says to be really progressive towards like open borders, etc. When at the material level, it has kind of like maintained the policies up to 95% of the previous governments. Do you do any work in Spanish waters or around the Spanish enclaves where, for example, work like the one that you do will be very much useful because we have cases of migrants drowning when they're trying to jump the fences, etc., or the violations of human rights that the Moroccan police does with the Spanish and European support?
We have discussed working around Melilla and Ceuta in the past, but we haven't so far. So if you have any good cases to suggest, happy to hear them. But I mean, yeah, there is human rights being violated every day on these borders, and definitely somebody should look at that.
Yeah, then thank you very much for all the interesting questions.
Thank you.
Pour être là.